Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Iman Bukhari, and I'm the founder and one of the volunteers here at Canadian Cultural Mosaic Foundation. Today, we have something that we're going to be talking about that has been requested so much. We've done a fair amount of presentations in schools about this, but this time we thought we'd really focus it on parents as well as teachers. And so we're live today to talk about how to talk to kids about racism. And we have three awesome guests today, so I'm going to introduce them. Our first guest is Jenny Matthews Tusso. And Jenny is committed to building a socially responsible city through systems change by co-creating policies and strategies with communities. She's dedicated to continuous learning and reflection, and she facilitates open conversations about racism and discrimination and our roles in social justice. Hi, Jenny.
Hi, everyone. It's great to be here.
Thanks for joining us. So our next guest here is Michelle Robinson. And Michelle Robinson is a proud Sault Dene mother and podcast host of Native Calgarian. She also encourages folks to post-secondary education with the Canada Learning Bond as the assistant producer of Chaos. She has been involved and continues to be involved at the community level for municipal, provincial, and federal level. Hi, Michelle.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us. And our last guest here is Cynthia Okafor. And Cynthia Okafor was born and raised in Calgary, Alberta, and has been quite active with social justice and equity work within the broader Calgary community. She works tirelessly to educate, inspire, and motivate others to create an environment that acknowledges, embraces, and values differences. Hi, Cynthia.
Hi, everyone.
So thank you so much. As you can tell, these are amazing women and all of them mommies as well. So this is really awesome. And so we're just going to get into this because I know everybody's so excited. And I see there's a comment already saying, so excited for this. Thank you. So the first question that we have, and this is open floor, so anybody can answer this, is why is it important to talk to kids about racism? This is something that, is really discussed a lot these days for important reasons. So why is it important to talk to kids about this?
Yeah, so I can start us off if you don't mind. So I think part of the reason why this conversation is important is based on a few things. So the first one has to do with the recent the killings, of Black American men in the States. For us in Canada, we've had the same issues as well. But of course, notably is George Floyd, which launched off all the protests and the marches in America, here in Canada and worldwide, to be in fact. I think the second fact has to do with, the fact that we're reaching a real tipping point when it comes to issues of racial tensions here in Canada, as well as America and the rest of the world as well. And so I think we're getting to the point where we can no longer avoid having conversations of race and racism, and we need to be open and have our conversations with our children over the issues. And I think the third one for me has to do with the lack of racial awareness and history of racism here in North America. What's ironic to me is the fact that when you study the history, our foundation was built on racism. When you look at colonization, the transatlantic slave movement, our treatment of Indigenous people, even some of our policies, when you look at our policies around voting, residential schools, even with immigration, highly steeped in racism. So we are getting to the point where we need to have the conversation. Our kids need to know what's going on as far as racial tensions and the root of racism. And I encourage parents, now's the time to really step up and have that dialogue with your children.
Michelle, I'll just add to that. Yeah, sure. It just took a second for the mic to show me if it was off, so I appreciate that. Cynthia, thank you. Obviously, I so appreciate and agree with everything that you were saying. I'm honored to be on this panel with you all. I do want to acknowledge that we're on the traditional land of the Blackfoot Confederacy, and that this is Treaty 7 territory with the Stoney Nakotas, Wesley, Chenechy, and Bearspaw nations, along with the Dene from Tsuut'ina. And I always acknowledge all First Nation, Métis, Inuit status and non-status across Turtle Island as the caretakers of all of Turtle Island. I wanted to say the reason why it's so important to talk to kids about racism is that whether or not you're a well-meaning parent, kids pick it up and they start saying things that will hurt my child and anybody else's child on this panel as quick as they can start to talk. And I think if we're going to be having real honest conversations about racism, like even myself, I have to work really hard at learning other cultures. And, that should be something that we should all be working towards. Our children, in my case, in my family, we go to vigils the way most Canadians go to Remembrance Day ceremonies. Our vigils are about missing and murdered Indigenous people, whether it was our neighbor Colton Crowshoe or whether it is a friend of ours, Jackie Crazy Bull's family. Every October 4th, we're going to a Sisters in Spirit vigil. So for us to be talking about racism, this is literally some of the things that we have to face all the time. The moment my daughter or any other Indigenous child is born, then is this conversation of status and this conversation of paperwork and the status of how Native you are because of colonialism. These are real issues that need to be talked about today. And for a lot of Canadians who never heard about Indian residential schools, they were so overwhelmed with it. Well, if you heard about Indian residential schools from the moment you were watching Sesame Street, then you would know that they have existed. Just as we know of a lot of other racist policies that were awful. These are things that there are kid-appropriate resources for children so that you can slowly introduce these concepts to them and go from there. So I just wanted to add that, and thank you.
And thank you, Michelle. I'm just going to step in for a couple of points as well, because I absolutely agree with Michelle and Cynthia in what you're saying. And thank you for the land acknowledgement, because I think that's important too. I think there's a couple of reasons why I think talking to our kids about racism is so important. I've been doing this since pretty much almost the day my kids were born. So I have 2 daughters, just so everyone understands that, yes, I am a mom. I'm a mom of now just turned 13-year-old, so I've got a teenager as of a couple of days ago, and I have a 10-year-old, both daughters. And what's interesting about my children, and I find that I have to have almost different conversations with them, because one is almost white, like she looks white. She takes after my spouse's side of the family more, and my other daughter, my older daughter, my 13-year-old, looks like me, and so she is a woman of color. And so I think that their experiences are going to be very different as they navigate this world. So I just want to put that down as it's kind of this context about why I'm going to say probably some of the things that I do say. One, I think it's important because it exists, right? And the fact of the matter is we can't pretend that racism isn't alive and well. And I find that, as a society, we love to bury our heads in the sand about this issue. And we like to pretend it doesn't exist. But the fact is it does. And so I'm not going to have my children, this is just as a mother, I do not want to have children who are going to be shocked when they get out in the so-called real world and realize that this is, as I said, alive and well. And so that's one of the things, is that I don't want to actively deny that racism exists. I want my children to be prepared. I also don't want them to be believing that dominant story. The believing that, being white is the norm. That is the dominant way of being. And I don't want them to strive to be the dominant ways of being. I want them to be truly themselves. And I want society to value them for who they are. And so that first starts with my children understanding that I don't want them to ultimately believe that dominant story. I want them to be critical thinkers. I want them to question what is going on around them, but also not to blindly follow what's happening. And so I think as a parent, I want my children to be critical thinkers. On top of that, I also want them to be part of transformative change. I want my kids to be in social justice. I admit it. Like, I secretly hope that my children tell me that they actually want to be anti-racist. They want to actively look at ways of deconstructing our racist policies, our racist systems. I want them to be a part of that movement. I don't, as I said, for them to just sit back and let things happen and perpetuate the problem. So that's the reasons why I think it's important for us to talk to our children about racism so that they can actively shape a future where we don't have racism. Like, I really do believe that that's possible. Anyway, that's my long-winded answer.
Thank you so much, and thank you, Michelle, for doing the land acknowledgement. So everybody's answers were great, and as women of color, we don't really have a choice. We kind of have to talk to our kids about racism. We don't have that choice because, unfortunately, the reality is that most likely they will experience it. So we don't have a choice in that sense anyway. So my next question is there an age limit? We see a lot of folks these days saying that, my child is too small, or maybe it's too late for them. Like, they need to figure this out on their own. So what is your answer to that?
This is something I had a lot to talk about because Canada has done such a great job of trying to not talk about race. And I really applaud what you were saying up there, Jenny, because, my dad is white and my mom is Native. And I really had to deconstruct racism in my adult years. And that was a very difficult road for me. I do not want that for my child. I want her to understand racism, and I want her to name it when she sees it. And unfortunately, she has experienced it as well. And she, much like Jenny was describing, is actually very white passing. And she has blonde hair and blue eyes. And I come across a lot of folks who have a lot of predetermined ideas of what natives are supposed to look like, and including me. People say, "Oh, how native are you?" These are conversations that we should be having conversations with everybody on, including children, that it's inappropriate to ask somebody how Indian they are, how Black they are, how Italian they are, whichever they claim to be, because you are who you are. And we need to start accepting people for that and not questioning that, so that our children don't have to deconstruct this all the time. It's exhausting. I actually came across a wonderful phrase, and it's called racial battle fatigue. And I feel that most people of color, most BIPOC, I love that term, by the way, BIPOC, a lot of people actually have this racial battle fatigue, always explaining what and deconstructing racism for people who are so ignorant. And can you imagine me asking and pulling somebody's red hair, or pulling somebody's hair at all? Like that, it's incredible what racialized people go through in so many ways and forms. And then the idea that it's okay to touch people unconsensually. I mean, I think that we all agree consent for everything matters, but politely people ask such rude racist questions, and they are completely oblivious to it. So that's why talking about race from the very beginning is so important, so that the children who are racialized have the language to talk about this, but also that those who aren't racialized know, these are terms you're not allowed to say. We really should be telling our children, do not say the N-word, do not say the squaw word. And I can say that because I'm Native, but the point is that I was called that at an early age, and I seen somebody share a meme that said something to the effect that you need to talk to your children right away, because we're the ones being told that they're allergic to us because we're Native, because we're Black, because we're brown. And that's not acceptable. That's not okay. And that they're learning it somewhere. They're learning it at home. So our parents need to start being way more accountable with what they're teaching at home when it comes to racism. And I didn't mean to take all the space, so I will let Cynthia and Jenny have some time here.
Sure. So I can jump in. So I would agree with Michelle. I really don't think there is an age limit in when you start having these conversations with your children. And if you go back to the research on child development, especially that pertaining to race and racism, you'll see that children as young as 3, maybe even younger, start to notice differences and start to classify people based on those differences. I've seen it with my own children. I've seen it with other kids as well. I think the real challenge comes, and I've been guilty, just as guilty, when my kids come and they start asking me questions, they start pointing colors, they start, contrasting and comparing, and I shy away from the conversation. And other parents, they shut down the conversation completely. And so one thing that we do need to realize is that, the healthy questioning, the curiosity, it's a normal part of child development. And I think that's something we need to keep in mind. And if I go back and reflect back, on my experiences, my parents were having these conversations with me as, far back as I can remember, probably 6 or 7 years old. And sadly, I'm still having the same conversations with my children. And I, pretty much what the conversation boils down to is that of preparation and survival. I feel that when it comes to my kids and stepping out into a racist environment, I need to equip them with the knowledge, the tools, and the skills to survive out there. With white parents, and I'm just basing this on my experience, I'm not speaking for all white parents here, I think it's a completely different conversation they're having with their kids. Often steeped in color blindness, where they're teaching their kids not to see color or it doesn't matter. And I think that could be highly problematic because for me as a woman of color, if you're teaching your kids, not to see color, then they don't see me or my experiences of a woman of color. So I think it's really important to embrace and create an environment where that conversation can take place.
Okay, so those were 2 awesome answers and fantastic, right? Yeah, I 100% agree. And I was going to say also to what Cynthia was talking about. Yeah, our children are learning messages earlier than the age of 3. And where are we getting them? Like a lot of times people will go on, oh, it's the parents, right? The parents are teaching our children. It's not that simple of an answer. It's insidious. It's in our homes if we like it or not. So let's talk about what my children were watching at the age of 2 and 3. Let's think about the Disney movies that they were watching, right? And what we see as evil and what do we see as good, right? So like I even used the example of the Lion King, right? You have Lion King, you think, oh, like where can racism play a part in this? Well, look at the so-called evil lion, like the brother, right? Whatever his name was, Scar or whatever it was, right? There was this element of blackness around him. I love Star Wars. Everybody, my friends all know that I love Star Wars, and I got my children hooked on Star Wars. But who's the evil character? It's Darth Vader, a big black man. And I always remember my child when she was like about 3 or 4 years old, telling me that she saw a scary black man in the backyard. And I realized after talking to her, she was talking about Darth Vader. But she's been already conditioned to learn that being black is associated with evil. Right, so as young as 3, and you watch like documentaries like A Girl Like Me, and you see the doll experiment, right, where black children are picking either a black doll or a white doll and understanding which was a good doll, the evil doll, the pretty doll, right, the ugly doll, and they always pick the white doll. So I know for myself what I did, like I tried to do, was to expose my children to normalize differences, normalize different relationships. I was very intentional in looking for dolls that weren't just white dolls. I looked for black dolls, I looked for indigenous dolls, I looked for Asian dolls, I looked for dolls that showed different colors, for instance. I also looked for, for those who don't know, I'm also Catholic, but you know how hard it was to find a children's Bible with people of color? I went to a whole freaking store and they were all like aisles of Bibles, and not one of those children, oh, sorry, I lied. There was one children's Bible written by Desmond Tutu that actually showed people of different colors. 3 full aisles. So it's not normalized. And so I went out of my way to normalize different, as I said, relationships, different families, and not the book about the Indian girl goes and has an Indian lunch. That's not what this is. It's about how maybe potty training and how different families are teaching their kids to potty train. So it's not even so much about how we talk to our children, it's what surrounds them. I also look for brown angels, like for Christmas. You know, my friends know I'm obsessed with looking for angels of different colors because it is so rare. But I want to make sure that in my home, my children see differences. And so it's not just about talking, it's about how we role model it as well. When I have so much more to say about this, but anyway, sorry.
Thank you. I'm actually just going to reply back.
Yeah, I know, but now I have to bounce on that. I wanted to say that it was really hard as a young mom to try to find very diverse, different ideas to throw at my daughter, and I had to work really hard at that. And I was very aware of the media and what was on the media. So as simple as it sounds, but always having white people on the 6 o'clock news is something that I absolutely avoided with my daughter for that exact reason of what Jenny is talking about, where it's that regular assumption that people of color are not on the mainstream. It's everywhere. So unfortunately, I had to really go with, Fraggle Rock, Muppets, and just stick to Sesame Street a lot, because at least there was a little more representation when it came to that. But unfortunately, even Mr. Rogers, he's white. And I know he tried really hard and during his time to try to, wash his feet with somebody who was black. But the point is that the main character was white. And if we normalize this, then that does affect our self-esteem. And I reference back to what Cynthia was talking about when she was talking about the different experiments, the doll experiments and such. Like the children are very aware of all of these different things, and if we don't put that extra into it when we're reading books and we're giving them books that are predominantly white characters, then we are doing a disservice to our children, because it's an internalized racism, internalized sexism. These are real issues that I had to deconstruct as an adult because I didn't construct them properly when I was a child. So I just want to thank Jenny and Cynthia, and I'm sorry to interrupt.
It is about being intentional. I think that when we think about the age limit, like right from the start, I'm not saying you're at a lost cause because you didn't start at the age of 1 year, but just like being right from you're never too young to role model, to open our children's eyes and experiences. That said, they are reading books as young as as parents, we're reading books, those board books. They're watching movies. I remember we watched Doc McStuffins, so that to be able to show that a young Black girl wants to be a doctor, and it was even with stuffed animals. But I was very intentional, and then sometimes you don't see it, and so then what kind of conversations do you have with your children about what their idea of beauty is, and where they're learning it from? So I think I drive my daughters nuts because constantly we'd watch a TV show, and I'll ask them, so. Why is it that person is seen as that's the only person that's seen as beautiful versus not? Or, just like to have even relationships, because I also like to talk about relationships as well, and families and how different families look. So how do I have those conversations and challenge their ways of thinking? So I want them to constantly ask questions, and hey, why not at the age of 3?
Awesome. Thank you so much. So everybody's kind of been answering my next question anyway, but I will ask anyway, and that's basically about what are some ways to talking to kids about racism, whether it's for BIPOC, so Black, Indigenous, people of color, or white people, because I understand those are different experiences, but what are some of the ways? And audience, by the way, if you have any questions, please fill them in right now within the comments, and I'll be bringing them up, and the panel can definitely answer your question.
So I think right off the bat, if you're having these conversations with your kids, it doesn't matter if you are a parent of color or if you're white, you need to have open and honest conversations with your children. And you need to create a safe and welcoming environment for that to take place. When it comes to the approach, I think it is different. Again, whether you're a white parent or whether you're a parent of color. And so, for example, for me, when it comes to white families or white parents, I think the journey towards becoming anti-racist often begins with yourself. And so because a lot of white folks that I know grew up in households where, yes, they didn't talk about color, everybody was the same. It almost seems like there needs to be an unlearning and a learning before you even embark on the conversation with your children. You need to get up to speed. So yeah, I think at the end of the day, yes, you need to teach your children about color. You need to teach your children to embrace color, but then the realities that come along with it as well, which I think is really important. When it comes to parents of color, we've been having these conversations with our children. I know for me, it's a constant with my kids. I am bold, I'm candid, I'm open with them when it comes to the realities of racism. Even when it comes to the way they dress. I know I drive my son nuts. He loves his hoodies, but I will not allow him to step out of this home and put his hoodie over his head. So everybody knows what happened to Trayvon Martin. And so for me, there was a bit of trauma that took place, I think nationally for a lot of Black parents, right? Where you didn't want to allow your children to step out because you were afraid of what would happen, or you were afraid of the perceptions. And so for me, I feel like I have an image to uphold when it comes to how my children show up in the world. Same things when it comes to academics. You know, I know Jenny and Michelle, you've probably heard this growing up. We were told that you had to work, you know, twice as hard as your white counterparts in order to be seen and valued. So whether it's in school or whether it's in the workplace. And this is the same message that I instill in my children. You know, I go over and beyond. You know, they get their homework. I'm giving them the, you know, extra reading drills, you know, extra math drills, because I want them to be seen and heard within this environment.
Jenny, I'm looking at your mic and then I'm like, no, I'll mute. And then you muted and I'm like, we're having the same conversation in our head, I can tell. So, you know, I love talking with you all about this because I feel so normalized. You know, I'm not going to lie. It's not safe to be Native. It's just not. My own vehicle does not have anything Native on it because I don't want to get pulled over by police. We work really hard at understanding what white coding is. That's what racial battle fatigue is. My daughter needs to know how to survive this world. Right now, she is missing her martial arts that she has been in since she was little. She's a Native girl. And when she goes missing, if she goes missing, I know that she will not be treated equally because the police will, if they come to my home, they will see Native art and they will see that this is our safe place to be Native and go, oh, this is a Native home, and treat my daughter differently. So that when we talk about racism to our children, we're arming them to be able to survive the world out there. And you know, and I just have to add a bit of the issue of sexism as well, because I have a daughter and she's 12 going on 30, and I'm not joking. She thinks that she's that clever. But, you know, she is still being mistreated because even as white passing as she is, she's still a girl. And she's not going to be treated well in this world. So we are big into teaching her about martial arts. Very soon I'll be teaching her about firearms safety. I think that's something that every human being needs to know, but even more so as an Indigenous woman, that she needs to know how to disarm a firearm. So the fact that I'm having conversations with my 12-year-old on, what rape is and what predatory behavior is from people, these are conversations I've been having with my daughter for years. Unfortunately, she's been going to these vigils with me for years, and she's been seeing what this society says her value is worth. And that's very difficult for me to be raising a daughter in this world right now. So when I talk to my daughter about racism, it's also with that issue of sexism too, knowing she is more vulnerable by simply being a girl. And I don't want to take away, it is actually Pride Month. I don't want to take away from the violence that all people face. And it is rooted in that misogyny, homophobia, transphobia, and this bravado that it's all right to mistreat people and to bully. And as a result, that's why we have such a high issue with missing and murdered Indigenous women. But I mean, our issues of racism go even further, talking about the Indian Act and who's Métis and who isn't. So here we have a 12-year-old who understands not just Canadian government, not just provincial government, not just municipal government, but Indian government and Métis government and colonialism, when instead of, I don't know, worrying about makeup. And one other point I wanted to make too, kind of back to the media, is that my daughter is on social media. She's on Instagram and she's on TikTok. And one of the conversations I try to challenge her a lot on is, why is she watching so many young male British people? It pops up in her feed all the time. So I'm constantly challenging her on that. And she watches there's different categories within these. And thankfully she's found a few different niches, but unfortunately, a lot of it is predominantly white, male, British people. And I always try to challenge her on that. And she doesn't love it because she's going on 30 and knows the world. So, these are hard conversations that I have to have with my daughter on a regular basis. And I just wanted to chime that in before I forgot.
Yeah, it is important, isn't it? We do really need to protect our children. And I know all four of us actually have daughters and sons too, right? But I don't have sons, but I have nephews. I do. There's so many thoughts that are going on in my head. And the first one is that, one of the things, like when I talk to my girls about, racism, is that I constantly tell them, and it drives them crazy too, is that you cannot afford to be average. I'm sorry. If you want to succeed in this world, you cannot be average. If you are average, you're going nowhere fast. We have to be extraordinary in order to get the same opportunities as our straight, white, able-bodied men. Just going to say it, right? And so I know a lot of people, they disagree with me when I say that. But I am not going to, again, lie to my daughters and pretend that they can be average. My true goal in life is to be mediocre. My God, wouldn't it be lovely to be mediocre and still have the same advantages as my straight, white, able-bodied male colleagues? Like, it would be amazing to me. Like, so I tell my daughters always that you have to be not even twice as, you have to be 5-6 times better than your average colleagues in class if you want to even remotely succeed. So that's my number one. Number two, I also think it's really important, like if we want to talk to our children, they need to start learning our history. And I think for both our Black, Indigenous people of color, but also for our white children as well, is that we need to start understanding our history of colonization and racism in not only this country, in Canada, in the US and globally. And I personally think it's important that we start talking about the doctrine of discovery. I think we need to start from way back then. Why did European Christians think that it was okay to go around the world to colonize communities and dehumanize non-Christians and to take their land, right? Like, I think we need to start there and then continue on with all the crazy stuff, like to understand, as I said, the racism in Canada and the US. And I've even started talking about what happened in India, right? Like when you think about colonization in India, right? And the stories of Gandhi and some of our social justice warriors. I've been having these conversations with our daughters. But I want to talk about slavery in Canada. I need them to understand the history. I want them to understand that racism existed in democracy, that they didn't even have the right to vote. Like we as communities didn't even have the right to vote. I think that we need to be having, I'm starting to get my girls to have debates now. I'm teaching them how to debate, to start looking at different sides of an issue, because you're going to have to know all sides of the issue if you want to keep functioning in the society. So right now here in Calgary, we're talking about the William Aberhart School, right? Like the name of William Aberhart. I know I have some pretty strong opinions about this, right? I am all about changing names. I don't know, society doesn't seem to have a problem with me having to forcibly convince me that I needed to change my last name when I got married, right? Like that was okay as a society for us to do. It was okay for TransCanada Oil Company to change their name to TC. Like we didn't have an outrage in society, but suddenly we want to talk about changing the name of a school from a person who, believed in eugenics. Then now we have this moral outrage of what's going on. So I always wonder about this differential outrage. I guess this outrage that happens in some situations and not in others. And so I want my daughters, I've been teaching them to have these debates about what's going on and to learn the different sides of the issue. So I think that's one way that I get my children to start talking about is to understand history, understand the people who made change in social history. Like for me, like I think about Maya Angelou, I think about Gandhi. You talk about some of the greats that have happened in society. The second one is that I also want to get our kids to understand and define racism. I think we have to have a common understanding of what racism is. We have all sorts of different definitions. And I think in all families, we need to have a common understanding so that we're having a productive conversation. So if you want your children to go out there in the world and they need to be part of a productive conversation, we need to be honest about what racism is and define it for what it is. And the last one is that I want to teach our children, and this applies, I would say more for white children because of we're always constantly having to defend ourselves of our experiences of racism. I always say to my colleagues, can you just please shut up and listen? Just listen. I don't want to justify why I feel like racism has happened. I don't want to have to justify every single feeling I have around this. It is, and the other one is that, Jenny, what's the solution to all of this? What's the solution? My God, I'm constantly asked that. Instead of just listening, just sit and listen and be compassionate in the way you listen, be active listeners. I would say if you could teach our children to be that, and then to take that, reflect on your own behaviors and have a growth mindset about how can I change my behaviors based on what my friend just told me, my colleagues just told me. So can we teach our children to listen and reflect on what their friends are saying to them, make those changes, apologize for their actions? There is nothing wrong with actually owning that you make mistakes. We make mistakes all the time as parents, as people. And so we need to learn how to apologize for our actions, teach our children to be able to apologize and make changes. Anyway, that's my thoughts.
Thank you, Jenny. It's so funny because I was talking to Jenny last week and I was like, I had this radio interview and this lady asked me, what is the solution to racism? And I'm like, what, like, and I told her some answers and she's like, I need concrete answers that we can, do 1, 2, 3 and then have it end. And it's just like, do you not understand how complicated this is? But we have a lot of questions coming in. Thank you so much. Feel free to keep writing them. I am going to put them up on the screen and whoever wants to answer, please go right ahead. So, hey, Carla Cote, I know you. So, and I know a few folks know her too. So how do we raise children to respond effectively and humbly when they make a mistake, hurt someone with a racist action, for example? So whoever would like to answer, please do.
Cindy or Cynthia, I wanted to ask you if you wanted to respond to anything we said too. I felt like maybe you were going to chime in.
Yeah, I was. Sorry, Carla. Carla, forgive me. I'll see you at work tomorrow. But I was just going to go back, because I think part of it is having the conversations with our children, but I think there's a larger focus, and I think about the schools. And I want to encourage the parents that are out there, if you're on school councils, on advisory bodies at the schools, we really need to advocate and work towards decolonizing the school system. I did it was a teaching session at the university. It was probably about a few months back. And I had one student in my class who didn't know that colonization took place in various parts of the world. So Africa, in India, she thought it was exclusive to Canada. And as much as I'm grateful that we have changed our curriculum up a bit and we're teaching about truth and reconciliation and the experience of Indigenous folks, I would love to see more diversity, within school content and what we're teaching our kids. And I would say we need to decolonize the staff composition as well. I think if you look at stats, about maybe 70% of teachers are white. So bottom line, there's not enough diversity, and I would like to see more representation, folks within the school system that my kids can look up to. So that's my little spiel. Sorry, everyone.
No, I think that's great, Cynthia. Carla, I know Carla too. So hi, Carla, it's great to see you. Yes. So how do we raise our children to respond effectively and humbly? I think there is something about I try to teach my children to be able to acknowledge their mistakes, to sit and learn, and I think that's first. When somebody's talking to you, when you do make a mistake, acknowledge it, own that you made a mistake, and don't sit and try to justify why you made the mistake. And I think it really goes far when you're building relationships with people. So with my children, I'm like, I don't want to, don't sit there and say, well, I'm sorry, but, right? Like we get that a lot from not only just children or adults as well. Learn to apologize, own your mistake, and learn from that mistake. So make a commitment to learn from that mistake and move on. And I have found that in my friendships and in my relationships, when I make that commitment, it goes so much better versus when I say, I'm sorry, but I didn't really mean it. That wasn't my intention. And for whatever reason, and I'm not claiming to be perfect. Believe me, I have made my share of mistakes in this area. But what I've learned is that when I just say, I am really sorry that I hurt you, I am going to be better. I've heard what you've said. I am going to be better now, right? I'm going to learn and be better now. I think that's important. It's also important for our children to accept an apology. And so to teach our children that when somebody apologizes to them, that you don't hold on to that anger, that you accept an apology. It is important to learn how to accept one as well. So how to give an apology, but an effective apology, a meaningful one, and how to receive one as well. That's just my thoughts.
Hey, folks. So one of the things that really put me in counseling was actually the fact that I felt like I had to be perfect. And I was raised that I had to be perfect. And I found out through the trauma that comes from the Indian residential school that a lot of us were taught to be perfect. And I think that is a lesson that we as parents should be teaching all of our children. A lot of children have anxiety, and we have to teach them that we are not perfect. They're not perfect. None of us are perfect. And I loved how Jenny talked about teaching how to do an apology. And I think this is a really good time to showcase, we all have some type of privilege. So me being straight and cis, I have to regularly say, I'm sorry, they, them, and re-say a sentence acknowledging that I said it wrong the first time with the wrong pronouns. I'm very ableist. For example, many of the different rallies that I've gone to, I've videotaped, and even if there was a signing interpreter, I still didn't videotape them, and I had no particular reason why I didn't do that other than I was being ableist. So we all have strengths, weaknesses, privileges, and I think if you can showcase that we're not perfect people, we know how to say sorry, we correct our mistakes, and we work hard at continuing to showcase that we can make this world better. And even today, I called Cynthia Cindy. I don't even know where that came from. So
I am a Cindy, actually.
Just that constant, we all make mistakes, all of us. I'm absolutely not perfect in our culture. Well, now that I've started walking down the red road, I see healing as a lifelong journey. And it's not something that, in my 20s, I went to counseling for domestic violence. Done. It's not like that. It's ongoing. It's forever. And I think we have to be a lot more humble in the way we choose to walk this world. So just to add my 2 cents. Thank you for your question.
And I just want to add to what Michelle was saying, just, this whole concept of perfection, especially when it comes to anti-racism work. When I teach and I educate others in this area, there's this huge fear, to even embark or engage in the conversation. And I see this with adult learners. And, for me, even as a trainer, as an educator, I'm always making mistakes. I'm not perfect. I have a lot to learn. And Jenny and I have had this conversation. And so I want to encourage, all the parents that are out there, it is okay. You know, work in this area it's not perfect, it's messy, it's ugly, but I think we need to do a better job at really supporting each other and again, creating that safe space where we can have these conversations.
Thank you so much. Brilliant answers. So the next question is, I am a teacher who teaches classes mostly made up of First Nation students. Do you have any suggestions for how I can make sure my classroom is a space where my students feel authentically heard, validated, and loved?
So, and I think that, maybe it was Jenny that talked about our settler history as well. I really do believe that it is critical for all of us as Canadians to sit down and really know who our ancestors are. And when you start any type of meeting, anything like that, and you start with that land acknowledgement, and you start by acknowledging your settler history as well as maybe your Indigenous history, that helps connect us all. And I think that especially if you have a lot of Indigenous people, I would really recommend you bring in an Indigenous elder or, teacher. If you hear that sound, that's my dog in the background. I apologize. Because what can happen is that you can be exposed to, smudging and different ceremonies, maybe talking circles that you'd be surprised what can come from that. But as a teacher who can't maybe do that every single day, you can start doing things like land acknowledgements, and you can have sharing circles, and you can encourage Indigenous to have that right to speak, because I know my daughter has been absolutely shamed in the classroom. And I see a lot more teachers that are trying to be good teachers, but ultimately, are you given space to Indigenous people on talking about Indigenous issues? If we're in a conversation talking about Black Lives Matter, give that voice to people who are Black. That has to be kind of a regular protocol. I run a book club called Chapters and Chat, and it's free. It's open to the public. And that we always give space to the Indigenous people for us to talk about Indigenous issues. So just things to be thinking about as you have these conversations. Racism isn't really up for debate, but I think that you can learn a lot from your Indigenous students, especially if you're talking about Indigenous issues specifically. And again, I can't stress land acknowledgements. It's not a 94 call to action, but it creates a safer space. Just as when I introduce myself with she and her pronouns, creates a safer space for those who may identify as transgender or LGBTQ2+ in general. So, it's just trying to create those more accountable, braver spaces. So that would be my answer.
Thank you so much, Michelle, and thank you, Katie, for your question. If anybody has any questions, please put them here, and I will put them on the screen. We have another question, and this was sort of answered, but it says, "Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for this conversation. I'm a new mom, so haven't entered the school system yet, but I'm wondering if you could comment on our role as parents to challenge the school system for the inclusion of BIPOC history, stories, role models, and thank you." And I know, Cynthia, you sort of answered this question a little bit, but if anybody has anything more to add.
Jenny, I don't want to take more space. If you want to jump in here, please do. Again, I've actually been trying to challenge people a lot more on the land acknowledgements, whether you're at a parent council meeting or whether you're at a sporting event. I mean, the fact is that these are ways that you can start having these conversations and encouraging other people to be talking about what inclusion looks like. I've had to work really hard to know when Black History Month is or when Pride Month is, and I really encourage all parents to do those things, because it's not just me. Assalamu alaikum when you come into your Muslim brothers and sisters, like learning how to say certain phrases, it really is validating for a lot of folks. And I have an auntie who's Chinese, so knowing when the Lunar New Year is and celebrating that and having themes around that. I mean, we celebrate, Easter and all St. Patrick's Day. It's not that hard to throw up different decorations depending on the season and what's happening so that people feel more welcome. And in talking to your kids about that, like, it's not just the role of Sesame Street to talk about it, it's also our role as parents to value and show up to different parades, the Sikh parade that happens in the Northeast every year, the Pride Parade. There's so many different cultural events. I mean, what a great excuse to go down to a Filipino festival in order to enjoy different cultures. So, you know, I really just encourage people to work harder at being multicultural and not just going to Egg Fest or Stampede, but seeing that everybody's culture is equal and matters. And the food's great. I don't know why we have to have that conversation. I'm just kidding.
I also, you're funny. I think, okay, so as a parent who does have children in the school system, and to Cynthia's point about being involved in your parent council, I think sometimes, like, I know one of the things that I do to push in terms of the parent council, but also with the principal and the teachers, is that we have to move beyond, I always say, the 3Ds. The dining, the dress, and the dance, right? And so that's not what inclusion and equity is. I can't explain to you how many times I have when parents or a teacher will come up with this brainiac idea that how we're going to deal with racism in our school is we're going to have a multicultural fair, right? Where there's going to be food, and you get to dress in your ethnic wear, and you get to see the dances, the Bollywood dances, right? And they think that is what inclusion is. And I always try to push them to go further than that. Like, please don't think that you've ticked your job. And so it's challenging your schools to go beyond that. Like, to when Michelle was talking about bringing in, let's say, Indigenous elders into your school and bringing in speakers. Like, one of the things I'm doing with the school that, my daughters are a part of is how do we bring in strong women leaders to talk about their careers and talk about leadership, but, not always from the same old people, right? Let's talk about, different ways of leadership versus, as I said, the 3D. So that's just one possible idea. Also challenge, who's the teachers in the schools who are seen as the experts, and and can we start looking at not only I'm all about diversifying leadership. I'm a big believer in that, but it's not just about having the token person there as well. It's about understanding that there are different ways of leading, and we need and different ways of doing. And so how do we encourage that in the schools? So anyway, those are some of my thoughts.
Yeah, and I'm just going to jump on that. I think for me, I'm a policy person. I love policy. I often think about some of the changes we can make at the policy level, right? And so one thing you'll find with organizations, you'll find it with schools, is we have these policy and value statements. We believe in diversity and inclusion and equity, but then it doesn't transfer over. It's not implemented or weaved at the organizational level. And so I think we really need to hold organizations and schools accountable. If you're putting these statements out there, you need to put some legs to them, and we need to hold the schools accountable.
Thank you so much. And Jenny, just relating to your comment, what you said about Multicultural Day, I can relate. Like, I'm wearing my culture clothes right now because I love them. But I remember grade 5, new immigrant to Canada. Hey, it's Multicultural Day. Wear your cultural clothes. That was the worst decision ever because everybody bullied me. I was the only one. I thought I was the cool kid, going to show everybody my culture clothes. Hey, get to know. But I was bullied instead. So teachers, you also have a role to play to make sure that your environment is safe. If you are going to encourage kids to showcase their culture, then make sure it's safe. And then, what's funny about that is that when I entered high school, again, new school, don't know anyone, Halloween, that is when people, particularly of my culture, so South Asian background, that's when they felt comfortable wearing their culture clothes. How unfortunate, but that was the reality.
I was going to say that it's interesting you said, I have a real issue with people pretending to be inclusive when they wear a sari. They think that they're so cool that they can wear a sari to an event. Like, I know this is a personal issue of mine, okay? Like, unless you're invited by the community to wear a sari, that's different. But a lot of times they'll show up to a diversity or inclusion event and wearing a sari to pretend, like, and they want to, it's almost like performance, right? Look at me, I can wear a sari. But if I wore a sari or Indian outfit on a regular day to work, there would be real consequences to that. What's wrong with you? Why are you wearing that? Get with the program. but a white person can wear a sari and it's cool. Wow, look how socially aware you are. So I know that that's a personal issue of mine. So I think it's interesting that you talked about that. And sometimes what I see in Halloween costumes is, again, they'll put on like a headdress, and it becomes a costume. Something that's very culturally significant to us becomes a costume. And I actually have real issues with Halloween and people, taking our significant traditional, cultural significant dress as something as part of a performance. To show off. I know I'm not explaining myself well here, but it's just, I know it's an issue that I have.
I think, Michelle, did you want to say something?
No, well, my screen just went black, so I had to move my cursor more than anything. But I just wanted to say thank you. I seen Audria's point there, and I'm glad that other people are listening and see that, because I think we don't see enough people who are of color, not just in the parent council, but also that bigger picture of community associations and such. And when I was talking about this at that community level, it was the same kind of conversation. Well, we'll just have a multicultural event, and then that will help us with inclusion and neighborhoods. And the truth is, they don't create a safe place for us to be. And the other part is that I live in a community where when we tried to have a vigil, the police came. And the community association wouldn't even let us in the door. So we have to be honest about how pervasive that racism is, because a bunch of natives showed up in a field, and that obviously how my neighbors felt it was comfortable to call the police on us. And Hawk's helicopter was over us. So how do you even have a vigil and mourn somebody when you have that type of issue happening? And how do you explain to your kids that when more than one of you show up in a field, that you're likely going to have the police called on you? These are things that we have to talk about with our kids. They have to be caught. I really loved how Cynthia talked about how we dress and how we leave our house, because if we don't do that, then even for me, when I first go into whether it's a parent council meeting or even a parent teacher interview, I actually don't dress anything that shows my Indigenous heritage, because if I do, there is a higher likelihood they won't treat me as kindly as if they would, as if they just assumed I was white. And the fact that I have to white code, white pass, dress white, that's really problematic in our society. We actually haven't created that space at all. So just the teachers creating space, I think you have to really understand how society itself doesn't really welcome us in general, whether it's the receptionist at the school, or whether it's a parent council meeting, or whether it's a teacher. To be honest with you, the education system I have found to be so pervasively racist from the day you walk in to the day you leave. And we're literally considering homeschooling next year for that reason. So yeah.
Yeah, I'm just going to make, I feel like we could be talking so much about all of this. I think one of the other things, when I'm thinking about just even in the school system, and let's say you are a parent that is on a parent council, what I ask is that, let's say I make a comment or a suggestion on making something better. Please back me up, right? There's so many times where I'll have parents or people come to me afterwards, work committees, especially at work, but on parent councils too, is that they'll come up to me afterwards, Jenny, that was an awesome idea. Geez, I can't, that was a brilliant idea, but they won't say it actually in a meeting when we're around other people. And so, think about your role in terms of not only in your workplace, but at the schools, if you're at the tables, parent council meetings, that, when parents of color make suggestions, listen, but back them up, and don't tell them afterwards you thought it was a great idea, because more often than not, I almost make it as a game. At the end of the day, it's become so bad that, it's a game that, we talk about that, have to have it mentioned 3 times before anyone takes it seriously. If it comes from me, if it comes from my white colleague, it could be said once and it's brilliant, or they'll be able to say my comment after. So as parents or as people on meetings, yeah, back us up so that, like, we're not there by ourselves, because it's exhausting. I'm exhausted. I'm exhausted after every meeting because I feel like it's me against the world. But then I find out afterwards it wasn't the case. Well, like, let's please do something about it in the middle of the meeting as well. Just wanted to add that piece in. Simple things. What are the simple things you can do to make a difference, right? And so I think that's one of them.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So we have one other question, but I'm going to save it for last because I know we're kind of running out of time. We're almost at an hour here. So before my last question to you all three are there any resources that you would recommend in terms of talking about racism to kids?
Well, I'm going to start with the adults. I always go back to the adults. And so two books that I really, that I've enjoyed. So White Fragility, I don't know if you can see that, by Robin DiAngelo. My latest read is Me and White Supremacy by Layla Saad. Really great book. So again, if you're going to embark on the conversation with your kids, I think you as a parent need to become anti-racist and you need to do your homework. If you're talking to your youth, for example, another book that I recently came across is called This Book is Anti-Racist by Tiffany Jewell. So again, provides really good context into what racism is. There's examples, there's exercises that you can do. And I'm sure many of you are familiar with Ibram, I hope I'm saying his name right, Ibram X. Kendi. So he's the author of Stamped and then Anti-Racist. He recently came out with a book this week on anti-racist baby. And so if you're not sure where to start as far as supporting, your children, babies, right up until adolescent, that's a really great book to get your hands on.
So yeah, so great. Like, in terms of books, yeah, I like Cynthia knows, she's been in my little library here where I have like 10,001 books. So I have a whole stack of books here. But like, if you want to look at, like, so you want to talk about race, there you go. Like, let's just start there, right? If you want to talk about this, there's some like, as I said, I have a whole stack of books. The Color of Democracy. This one is an interesting book that my colleagues at FIRE introduced me to. The person you mean to be. And so I like this one because it really speaks to, we talk about what it really means to be an ally. And, like, I have some real issues with the word ally, but it's really about how do you have a growth mindset. We know that this is a journey in terms of being anti-racist. And so I like Dolly's book because it kind of talks about how do you stop worrying about being a good person. Like stop worrying about that and actually start taking on a mindset. Shift your mind to be more in a growth mindset in this journey. So this is a book that I personally like. There's some really great websites too, right? Like there's Color Lines. If you want to check out Color Lines, they have some great resources for children and youth and how you can talk to your kids, activities that they could be doing. Facing History Canada is another one that I like to go to. It's a website, facinghistory.org. I know I'm talking very fast, so like that makes no sense. But Stanford University has a racial literacy toolkit for teachers that they could be using as well. There's so much out there. You can just Google, and you can find Google Talks, TED Talks on this. I just think that there's like 10,000 resources out there for you. But that's where I could begin. Michelle, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, you have to remember that I come from a generation that remembers having to know when the library was open, purposely going down there to read a purposeful book and then leaving. And nowadays you have in your hand a Google that is an encyclopedia forever. So it's hard for me to understand how this is so difficult for people of privilege to not understand. Robert Munch has even worked with Indigenous artists on making Indigenous content that's age appropriate. So like there's Indian residential school books that are age appropriate. There's a hashtag Indigenous Reads. There's tons of books. And I really like Cynthia's point about, starting with the parents. If you're a parent that's uncomfortable talking about racism, if you are uncomfortable with the term settler, can you start challenging that within yourself? Because like these are going to be problems that you are going to pass on to your children, just as all of us as parents have to talk to our kids about sex. We all have to talk about things that make us uncomfortable at certain points. And I don't like talking about a lot of subjects with my daughter, but I have to. And we all have to challenge what is making us uncomfortable and why, so that we cannot pass on that to our children, because they're going to end up on a counseling seat somewhere if you don't. So again, Indigenous reads, tons of resources that are age appropriate. CBC Books has been really good. Even Scholastics, when I go to book fairs and I see they have like a diversity kind of section where they have not just Indigenous issues, but a lot of different issues that I remember getting one on the Japanese experience during World War II when they were forced to go into interned camps. So like their books are available now, and we should be having those hard conversations, because this is a part of our history. We may not love it, but it's a part of our history. There's lots of part of history that I don't like. And, we had to work so hard to rename Langevin Bridge to Reconciliation Bridge. And these are policies, procedures that we're working on. Question these things. Even the money. I've seen a really great meme today that talked about some of the racist things all of the people on our money have done to us. So we need to start working on these. And all of the books that I had seen, both Jenny and Cynthia, I absolutely agree with. I love them. And I couldn't even encapsulate how many books there are for children, for Indian residential schools, and for Indigenous issues in general. And the parents at the very least should be reading them too, and be able to use the proper language of, I still get asked, should I use the term Indigenous or should I use Aboriginal? These are things that a Google search can tell you. And there's CBC documents have Eighth Fire. So there's lots of different documents that you can watch, or docs that are out there of videos, TED Talks. I couldn't agree more. There's so much. There's something called Red Talks, because TED Talks is very, they have a lot of rules of what you can and cannot say. So one of the local filmmakers here created Red Talks in order to be able to have Indigenous voices speaking Indigenous. And there's a really great book about settler colonialism that I recommend for folks. There's book clubs. Highly recommend that you start considering book clubs. So thank you, Deidre.
And I was
needs are there. Go ahead, please.
Well, I was going to make one quick comment. If you're a parent like me, who works full time, tries to volunteer as much as possible, and has 2 children that that demands your time, I do know for myself, I have a really hard time keeping up with all the reading. I fully get that. So, for individuals who are like me, there are some amazing videos on YouTube. There are amazing podcasts. There are amazing Google Talks. And so, so if you're the kind of person who just before it goes to sleep needs to watch a TED Talk, it's one of my favorite things, or a Google Talk or YouTube. I search out, Cynthia, I've noticed is writing down books. So check out those authors, and a lot of times they're on YouTube, and you can listen to their messages. It's a great place to start as well. So.
Does anybody have an answer to this question just from Deidre, who I know and love? She's just asking if there are any resources for explaining race to a child of color who has special needs.
I'm not 100% certain if we have books that are very specific to fetal alcohol syndrome in our world. That was something that I was going to look into, but there's also Gay History Calgary. That is a chapter I'm reading every night to my daughter, because I think it's really important she knows her history on that as well. So I wanted to add that intersectional lens, and I can't thank you enough, Deidre, for bringing up special needs, because even for me, again, with ableism, another example of things that I need to teach my own daughter. So thank you.
I'm not sure if anybody wants to add to that, Deidre, but there's an awesome website called Teaching Tolerance, and that's something that we tell anytime we ever do school presentations to teachers about, because there's so many classroom activities and lesson plans in there, and it has a lot of stuff for special needs children as well as other kids as well. And it's not just about racism, but also about other tolerance, so teaching tolerance in general. I'm not sure if any of the guests had any answer to this question. Otherwise, I will move on to the last question we have here.
I was just going to make one quick comment. I don't have an answer, Deidre, I'm sorry, but it's a really great question, because I do have a nephew with special needs, and and I remember, especially when he was going through school, some of the comments that he would be making about, like, he just didn't know, and it's not like you have to really know, was the bullying that he was experiencing as a result of his disability, so because of his race, and just listening to him sometimes, it would be really hard. So I don't have an answer to the question, but it's a really great one, and I remember I would just be open to having the conversation with him, but I don't recall any resources. I just don't know any resources. That's just a comment.
Yeah, and and I don't either, but I will thank Deidre for bringing that up. I think it's a reminder again, so I make mistakes, that's something I do need to be mindful of, the intersectional lens and the ways that others experience oppression. So thank you for that.
Awesome. So the last question we have here is, with racism and especially structural racism being a topic that is being covered globally due to the protests, do you think we will finally see lasting changes, or is this just going to be another buzzword for a few months before it disappears again? Can't thank the panel enough for your insights.
Well, just to jump in, I know my mind's kind of all over the place with this one. I'll start with the protests and the march, that we've been seeing, and a lot of activity that we've been seeing on social media as well. And so the one thing that I do want to remind those that we would consider allies, or another word that's used as accomplice. I don't like that word. I'd rather stick with ally for now. But if you are supporting, I think it's very, very important for you to do the work. So you're not just getting involved because it's trendy, everybody else is doing it. This also goes back to organizations and businesses that are, jumping on the bandwagon. So you need to do your homework. A lot of great resources out there, organizations that are doing anti-racist work. Take a class, and it's not a one-time thing. I think that's the one thing that you need to keep in mind. This work, it's a lifelong commitment. And so don't just do it in the spur of the moment, commit to doing the work.
So I'm gonna answer a couple things. Yeah, my head was spinning a little bit. One, this is just a point of contention with me. So I'm not even sure why we're calling things systemic racism or structural racism. Racism is structural and systemic. The word, it's a double, like you're just repeating yourself when you say systemic or structural. So it's racism, I think. And I do think that there are going to be lasting changes. We're seeing it already, right? Like we're seeing budgets being cut with police departments right now. Like it's happening. Like, people are talking about cutting the budget. I'm really hoping that, money is going to be diverted to education, healthcare, social services, housing, right? And so I am optimistic, that we will see some lasting change. We're seeing, I think I was on Facebook a couple of days ago, and I was seeing the list of changes that we're seeing in the US and in Canada already as a result of this. Now, is it something that, because I've been in social change and policy for a very long time, is it something that we're going to see and then all of a sudden it's going to yank back? Because I do worry about a concept I call the snapback effect that I've learned about, where we move so far ahead and society can't deal with that. And so what happens, it will, as a system, it can't handle such a big change, and it will snap back further behind than we were before. So I do worry about that, I admit. But right now we are seeing some changes, and I am going to be optimistic about it. But I am a little concerned that this is trendy, that people are jumping on this bandwagon because it's seen as the trendy thing to do, and in a couple of months we'll have something new. And so I do worry about that a little bit. Yeah. maybe we're making some policy changes that, as I said, my thing is if we could start putting money back into housing, education, healthcare, oh man, wouldn't that be like remarkable?
So I've been actually talking about what pinkwashing is, and that's where, companies will pretend that they're LGBTQ2 plus friendly, but then, not really have policies in place to protect those who do identify under that. And what I'm seeing right now is a lot of brown washing, black washing, red washing, where we're seeing nonprofits, governments, and companies pretending to be allies. But at the end of the day, if we were to really open their books, would we have equal wages? Would we have equal time? Would we have equal opportunity to these companies? Likely not. I had an elder tell me that there's a 30-year cycle for our issues, and that I'm lucky enough to be in the height of this one. And I hope that there's change. But we just celebrated the 5th year of the Truth and Reconciliation report, the 1-year anniversary of the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women Inquiry report. We have 231 calls to justice. We have 94 calls to action. And they've had 5 years to do 94. And I haven't seen a lot of change. The opposite. I've actually seen Jason Kenney say, we're not going to do land acknowledgements anymore. And do a lot of really great work. So I'm not as optimistic as other people, but I think it's because I'm very realistic about what to expect and how the cycles have worked, solely based off of the oral history that I've been told by other elders. So would I love structural change? Absolutely. Who wouldn't want that? Do I want my daughter to be safe walking the streets? Absolutely. Who wouldn't want that? I don't know if we're going to see that. I hope to see that. I've been talking about defunding the police. I've been talking about, reallocating funding in different ways for a very long time, but I don't know if society's there yet, frankly. There's a lot of what we call Karen power out there, and the Karens still rule where a lot of that money goes. So, and we've seen that in the House of Parliament yesterday, or the House of Commons yesterday, where, a female MP from Quebec shamed the leader of the NDP until they finally kicked him out. And that's the reality. So we need to see some pretty significant change in order for us to have hope for the future. But I mean, what I think and what I tell my daughter is that her generation's going to have it better than my generation. I know I had it better than my mom's generation. And I know that my mother had it better than my grandma's generation. So we just have to see the bigger long-term game of, in our case, 7 generations, and aim for making the world better now as best we can for the future, and arming our children with knowledge. So that's power.
Thank you so much to our amazing, amazing panel. And we know they're amazing because of all the comments saying that we love you. And yes, we do love you. So audience, if you would like to see more videos like this, please let us know, and let us know about any topics. And of course, the topic should be related to race relations. I just want to thank again, Jenny, Cynthia, Michelle, thank you so much for coming here today. This was the first time we did a live video, and I know we were all kind of like not sure how this was going to go, but I think it went brilliant. Thank you so much. You're so knowledgeable, so brilliant, and you do amazing work in the community. I think that's just what I want to say. I know each of them individually, and I know how wonderful they are, and I hear about them all the time. Like just the other day, somebody was like, do you know Michelle Robinson? She's doing this. Do you know Cynthia Okafor? She's doing this. What about Jenny Matthews? Do you know her? And it's like, yes, I know them. I'm doing a panel with them. And I'm just so happy that you were willing to give us your time. And it just means a lot. So thank you.
I want to make a quick comment too. Iman, you are amazing too. So I wanted to, you are like remarkable. And I'm always impressed with the activism that you are doing. And so I also want to say that you give me hope, and and what you've been able to do with your organization and advocating for changes at the city. I just want to give you, just kudos and my deepest respect for what you are doing as well. So you are amazing. I want to say that as well.
I want to quickly, thank the audience members for participating. All of our allies out there that are, have opened up themselves to learning, and just learning new perspectives, different ideas. Thank you.
I wish I could tell you how much I'm just honored to be on this panel at all, and I feel the same way that everybody has spoken so much of you organizing this type of event and all of the work that you do. I'm really honored to be here, and all of the comments with all the beautiful profile pics and the cute babies. I just can't thank the audience enough. Thank you all for letting me be here and share space with both you and Jenny and Cynthia. It's just been amazing. Thank you.
All right, everyone, that's a wrap. Thank you so much. We'll catch you next time. Bye.